Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government Foundation and Americans for Limited Government. And I'm joined today by Americans for Limited Government President Rick Manning. And today we're going to be talking about the United States. President Joe Biden has banned Russian oil imports. We import about 400,000 barrels a day from Russia, but no longer. It's now banned. Biden, under his own authority, I believe, can do this. And so, Rick, what is the size and scope of this? This is a huge decision. It's like we just cut the global economy in half. What does this play out?
Well, to put it in perspective, America we're about 8% of the oil we burn is from Russia. And so it's going to have some impact in terms of our economy. You'll see, it's kind of been priced in the cost of barrel right now in barrel of oil. But you're going to see some additional bump up in gasoline prices as a result of this. In terms of and so domestically, what Biden's doing is by negating Russian oil, if it's not replaced with oil from somewhere else, Saudi Arabia in particular, then essentially we're going to be seeing price constraints going up in order to try to force people, based on it costing so much, to drive less and consume less oil, which is actually what Joe Biden is trying to do through his Green New Deal agenda. So so you get down to it in terms of our domestic situation. The public needs to start telling Joe Biden and telling the congressman that we expect them to open the spigots in terms of allowing for domestic production. There are some things that are getting in the way of that, but many of them are, in fact, just prohibitions put in place by the Biden administration. And there are fields pretty much ready to be turned on. And there are some other fields that we could dramatically increase the production out of. The question remains, will the Biden administration get out of the way and let that happen?
That's a really good question. Why don't we find out by listening to what he had to say about this?
Today, I'm announcing the United States is targeting the main artery of Russia's economy. We're banning all imports of Russian oil and gas and energy. That means Russian oil will no longer be acceptable at U.S. ports, and the American people will deal another powerful blow to Putin's war machine. This is a move that has strong bipartisan support in Congress and, I believe, in the country. Americans have rallied to support the Ukrainian people and made it clear we will not be part of subsidizing Putin's war. We made this decision in close consultation with our allies and our partners around the world, particularly in Europe, because a united response to Putin's aggression has been my overriding focus, to keep all NATO and all of the EU and our allies totally united.
All right. So on that point, and he announces it, he says, we're all united. We're all on the same page. But this had actually followed yesterday, Germany saying that they didn't want to ban Russian oil and gas, and they're not. Germany is not going to do the same embargo that we are doing. We are actually acting unilaterally on this particular issue. Other European countries will join us. I imagine the UK and others will come on board to what Biden has just done. But Germany's saying they can't afford to do this, basically. And why is that? It's because they get 55% of their natural gas from Russia, 35% of its oil, and about half of its coal. And so what would the impact be of shutting all of that down suddenly on the same day? Is that prices, obviously, they're already going really high, but it would be even higher. Right now, according to the Energy Information Agency, and you guys can look this up, the Natural Gas Weekly Update, I recommend paying attention to this because it tells you what prices in Europe as a result of the war are right now. So whereas we're paying about $4 and change for our stuff, the European
stuff. What is stuff? What stuff?
Oh, I'm sorry. 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas we're paying $4 and change, and the Europeans are paying about $40 and change and rising. It'll be up to 50, 60, 70. And so there's some downstream impacts of this, namely that the Russians have threatened to do their own embargo. They said, you want to shut down oil coming from Russia? We'll shut down gas coming from Russia going through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. And so I think that we're definitely in a escalation trajectory right now. And here it was, the Deputy Prime Minister, Alexander Novak, hours after Schultz spoke, but before Biden made his decision, he said, quote, a rejection of Russian oil would lead to a catastrophic consequences for the global market. We have every right to take a matching decision and impose an embargo on gas pumping through the existing Nord Stream 1 pipeline. So the question is U.S. canceling its 400,000 a day barrel purchase from Russia? Is that enough for them to say, we're going to shut down the Nord Stream? What do you think, Rick?
Well, it's certainly a threat that the Russians have, and it's a threat that's been talked about in geopolitical circles for 50, 60 years. The danger of Western economies becoming dependent upon Russian energy, and in that dependence, being unable to maneuver, unable to essentially having energy handcuffs on that Russia holds the key to. Let me read something from what Joe Biden said that's I think really significant. What he said is this quote: "We are moving," and excuse me when there's a couple of jumbled grammatical things because they are quoting Joe Biden. "We are moving forward with this ban, understanding that many of our European allies and partners may not be in a position to join us." Let's emphasize that. He acknowledges that Europe won't be in a position to join the United States because Europe is about 10 years ahead of us in terms of imposing the Green New Deal. That's why Europe isn't able to join us. Germany has shut down nuclear reactors across the country. They're down to 2, and they're going to be shut down at the end of this year. They have shut down coal. They've shut down basically everything that isn't renewable that you can shut down. They've been pulling out of it. And so they became dependent upon 2 things: natural gas and renewable, so-called renewables, solar and wind. Well, it's winter time, and in wintertime in Germany, it's overcast. And when it's overcast, you don't get much solar, and it isn't as windy, so you don't get as much wind. And so the people of Germany they're literally suffering because of a lack of natural gas, and the lack of other energy sources. So what Biden is saying here is that Russia holds the key to this. They hold power over our allies and our NATO allies because they are energy dependent upon Russia. And in his admission to that, you have to remember that admission needs to be thrown back in his face every time they talk about the Green New Deal, because the Green New Deal is attempting to accomplish what happened in Europe, and the net result of that is energy dependence on others around the world.
How could you even wage a war with green energy tanks? Like, could you imagine having a lithium tank get blown up every day in the middle of a war, and you have to replace that? That you would never do that. Like, you'd want cheap, the army with the cheap gasoline tank is the one that's going to move forward logistically. Like, you see that some people talk a lot about it's only been a week and a half or 2 weeks. Why haven't they conquered the entire country of Ukraine yet? And it's like, well, it took Hitler about a month to take over Poland. I think it was 35 days actually. So I mean, I don't pretend to know anything about the logistics involved, but it would seem to me that a all green military would be defeated pretty easily.
Yeah, it's extension cords only run so far. But yeah, it's
right. You're going to have charging stations on the way to your enemy capital.
Essentially, your logistics in terms of that become.
Right.
We're not there yet. Okay. Clearly, and the irony is, here's the irony. We have a nuclear Navy, and the Navy's attempting to move out of having nuclear-based Navy and going back to other fuels. And in fact, has invested a lot of money into biomass fuels, which cost about 12 times as much as they're replacing gas, other gasoline, not the nukes.
It's just idiotic. I don't get it, Rick. This is just a fantasy. This is idealism.
It's dangerous.
It is, and it's dangerous. Idealism usually is dangerous.
And that's and that's where let me finish what Biden says. After he says that Europe's dependent upon Russia, essentially Europe is dependent upon Russia, so they can't actually engage in an oil embargo against Russia. Biden goes on and says the United States produces far more oil domestically than all of our European countries. Yay! Combined. In fact, we are a net exporter of energy. When you include natural gas, that is true. So we can take this step when others cannot. But we're working with Europe and our partners to develop a long-term strategy to reduce their dependency on Russian energy as well. Well, that strategy darn well better be something other than putting up more solar panels that are we're dependent upon China to make, and windmills that we're dependent on the wind to blow. It is a that's.
Well, I think that takes us to the second part of this, which is that in addition to increasing oil and drilling, which appears to be absolutely necessary, and even Elon Musk gets this. I was surprised to see this, but he says, hate to say it, but we need to increase oil and gas output immediately. Extraordinary times demand extraordinary measures. This is a person whose companies have benefited, I think, more than anybody from pro-green investment policies that were put in place largely by the Obama administration, starting in about 2015, by incentivizing pension retirement investments into ESG, or environmental, social, and governance factors. We're talking about the E here. The E is the environmental. That's who Elon Musk made all his money from. The market cap for Tesla got over $1,200 in recent months before the recent market correction because of ESG funds having a federal incentive, not just in individual retirement accounts, not just in 401ks. Starting this year, the Biden administration is going to be investing federal pension dollars into these ESG funds, which is going to benefit green companies, and it restricts capital to carbon-based companies like oil or coal or even nuclear, which is not even carbon-based. Just because the Green New Deal had it in its crosshairs.
Let me interpret what that means. The federal government, the Biden administration, the Obama administration before it, recognized the Trump administration stripped away that guidance that allowed for pensions to be allowed
they ordered it down.
Thumb on the scale for green pensions. They stripped that away and said, we don't care if you're investing in green or blue or yellow or red. What we care about is are those companies you're investing in the black? Because the fiduciary responsibility of a pension fund, according to the laws that they're built on, is that they have to take the financial, growing the pension, growing the 401k, growing the IRA. That has to be the number one priority. And it can't be replaced by, gee, I really like sunflowers, and so I'm going to go invest in sunflower farms. Or right. I think that we've got this. We want to have some kind of green energy thing, so we're going to invest in a lot of green energy products that end up failing. So you can't do that. You have to, with pensions, you have a much more difficult threshold to overcome. The Biden administration has basically broken down that barrier.
Oh, yeah.
And here's the dirty little secret, Robert. Did you know that Wall Street, they make about twice as much on ESG investing than they do on regular investing?
Why is that, Rick?
Because they have to become active investors. They have to look at all the companies and determine if they fit in the ESG category, and that costs people money. So people end up paying more money for the ESGs than they do for actual investments that are determined by whether you're not going to make a profit or not.
Well, then they don't care about that either. Just the stock price needs to go up, right, Rick? And so because of ESG funds, which currently encompass $38 trillion of assets under management all over the world, BlackRock is the largest hedge fund in the world. They also have the largest ESG fund. They're a $9 trillion hedge fund. Now, this is already about 1/3 of all of global capital is ESG, 1/3. And by 2025, Bloomberg News estimates it'll rise to 53 trillion, still about a third of all assets under management. But still, I think that number is going to continue to grow because of these incentives, because frankly, the Labor Department under the Trump administration didn't get to this until 2020, late in the year. And so Biden was able, whatever effect it might have had to roll this back was very short-lived, because the Biden administration, President Biden, immediately is rescinding it and moving on to the old rule under what was Obama. So these hedge funds, I don't think have changed any of their actions as a result of whatever the Trump administration attempted to do, which might have been too little too late, because he didn't get reelected.
Yeah, that threw the gum in the works. And, one of the ironies on all that is the hedge funds were reacting to when Trump did his guidance, his regulation rather. The hedge funds essentially said, okay, well, then we're just not going to tell anybody we're doing ESG in our marketing brochures, but all the hedge fund managers and everybody else on Wall Street is going to know we're doing it. And so they'll get their social credits for investing in our funds, but we'll hide that fact from the federal government. That was actually the active proposal on how to deal with the Trump changes in the rules, because the ESG funds are not going to give up the advantages they have. And quite honestly, you were talking about Tesla. Well, one of the reasons, I also would remind you that Elon Musk also owns Solar City, which puts half of the, puts a lot of the solar panels on people's houses. He was early in on Solar City as well. So he has made his fortune on green.
I think that's what makes it.
And on government subsidizing those economic decisions. So while Elon Musk is doing a lot of great things now, and he's become somewhat iconic, and I really like the way he's kind of the direction he's going, you can't ever forget that a lot of his wealth was created through government subsidies to the products that he was selling, and he was taking advantage of those subsidies. And quite honestly, anybody could have. He did.
And that's just the sales of the company. As far as the market cap and the stock purchase of the stock, because of this ESG incentive, he's made hundreds of billions of dollars just as an investor owning the company.
Right.
And that's, I think that it's the biggest part of that. People don't think of it like, oh, they don't need to make a profit, Rick. How do you like that? That free market capitalism? No more. This is, I think, what the reset from the World Economic Forum was all about. It was all about ESG. This is by design to get us off of carbon-based energy, but apparently it poses a security risk for Europe. Oh, wow. Who could have predicted that? The Defense Department was saying this back in 1962 about Soviet exports of oil. But here's Elon Musk. He says, hate to say it, but we need to increase oil and gas output immediately. Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. And then he says, obviously, this would negatively impact Tesla, but sustainable energy solutions simply cannot react instantaneously to make up for Russian oil and gas exports. And I think that is absolutely right. If we want to offset Russia, we need to basically double our gas exports. We're doing about 5 trillion now of cubic feet a year of natural gas. We should do about 10 trillion if we want to offset Russia and what was going to come out of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. I think that's very important. And I had a little call to action on this one, Rick, which is that Congress should defund the ESG regulation. I think that we have enough information now to say that we should not be diverting capital away from carbon-based energy, quite to the contrary. And in fact, there's so much other stuff with this ESG that I think is objectionable. If the American people knew what was in it, how it's funding critical race theory training at corporate America, how diversity and inclusion programs are basically illegal violations of the Civil Rights Act. You're not supposed to make decisions based on race. There's a lot that goes into ESG. And it's basically turning the capitalism model on its head.
100% correct. And the thing that you have to understand is companies with a third of the capital being invested in ESGs in our markets, companies want that capital invested in their company. So they go to these ESG managers and the BlackRocks of the world, and they say, what do we need to do to get on your ESG list? and they say, okay, well, you have to have this much in terms of you have to do these trainings on critical race theory. You need to do these trainings on various different subjects, and so they basically dictate the human relations policy, the HR policy of these big companies. And so you have to put a plan in place to not be, an oil company, for instance, in 20 years. And that's what you have to do to get this money invested in you. And
It's
so board of
insane. It's
directors,
totally nuts. I
and
mean, we
so
just need to rip this thing out by the roots right
it is-
now. American people, you need to tell your Congress members, House and the Senate, that you don't like this type of diverting of capital away from critical infrastructure and other needs, security needs in terms of being energy independent, being able to fuel your military, but also your economy. You can't just have foreign adversaries with the ability to turn the lights off. And I wanted to circle back, Rick, now back to Germany, back to Russia, and like what's playing out with the oil embargo right now. I think that this is it's an important step by the United States in this capacity, but taking the sequencing of it, where first Germany says we need Russian oil and gas. We say we're flirting with doing our own embargo. And then Russia says, hey, if you happen to do an oil embargo against us, we're going to do a gas embargo on you, Germany. We're going to turn off the Nord Stream 2. And then we come back and say, that's fine. We wanted Germany to shut off the Nord Stream anyways. So we're going to do our own embargo now. So we don't seem concerned about escalation at all. If this is the policy, it seems the policy is escalation. What do you think?
Well, what we know is Putin is all in, and I didn't think he would go this way. I think it's a huge mistake. But that's not the way he saw it, and so he has decided that it's all or nothing. He's put 80% of his ground resources, meaning his tanks and personnel carriers and the like, are being invested in Ukraine, and it's point of no return. He's either going to take Ukraine or he's going to die trying, and that's just where he's at. That's the position he's put his country in.
It's pretty dangerous.
He can.
Russia is completely. I'm a big diplomacy person. I think that they should have exercised more restraint in this case. Like an invasion, I think they didn't need to do that to get what they wanted on energy. And in fact, they're getting the opposite of what they wanted. But unless the plan was all along to split the economy in two, it's very unusual for adversaries to both be pursuing the same policy. It's like, oh, well, please don't embargo me. Germany says that. And then Russia's like, we're going to embargo you if your friends embargo us. And then we're like, we don't even buy that much Russian oil. We'll do the embargo. We'll act unilaterally. And so everyone's fighting to get an embargo. The Russians apparently don't care if there's an embargo. No. We want an embargo. Germany's the only one that seems to say we're going to be hurt really a lot by this. Let's go to Betsy Burns here.
Robert,
I think this is a very important point about what would happen to Germany. Look at the wind energy in Texas.
A lot of Europe consumes a tremendous amount of Russian oil and natural gas. So it isn't just Germany. Germany's distinguished because they don't have any other source for natural gas, and they've destroyed their energy economy and become completely dependent upon natural gas. So if Russia says, for instance, we're going to double the price of natural gas purchased through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, they can do that, and Germany has to pay it because they don't have any other sources. And so the things that Germany's now looking at doing is fast-tracking building of liquefied natural gas terminals and the like, so they can have ships come and offload liquefied natural gas. LNG, is liquefied natural gas is known, is significantly more expensive than natural gas that's piped. There's more, you have to process it, you have to ship it. There's a lot more that goes into getting it from point A to point B. But the fact of the matter is that would provide them with alternatives to being dependent upon Russia. One of the things that I think is clear here, though, is you said, well, we need to increase the amount of LNG we produce by are able to export by double.
Yeah.
Well, the answer to that question is then we have to start pulling that out of the ground, because we can't just double the export and and miss our meeting our domestic needs of natural gas. So it is a process of both pulling more out of the ground, creating the pipeline increasing the pipeline networks, expanding the pipeline networks to get that from the Marcellus Shale in particular, or out Eagle Ford in Texas, or even the Bakken Field in North Dakota.
But we're not doing that.
But
Joe
we're not
Biden doesn't
doing
want to
that.
do that. He's married
And
to the
that's
Green New Deal,
that's-
and that's the problem. And what it's going to lead to, therefore, the embargo. Let's go to the chats now because we're coming up on a half hour here. Betsy
Yeah.
Burns says, look at the wind energy in Texas last year. Complete breakdown in winter and lives lost from cold weather. That's true. I actually had to go back and look at that. 246 Texans died when power could not be restored last year in February, when half of the state's electricity generators went offline amid surging demand. And the first ERCOT to engage rolling blackouts across the state to save the electricity grid. They saved it, but at pretty great cost.
Robert, the thing, they saved it because in the last hour they figured out a way to get oil from Oklahoma
Right.
into
Right.
Texas, so
Right.
they could actually get their generators working again.
Right.
So,
But this is not just a home heating problem, though. We're using natural gas to do electricity as well. And so the 4.5 million homes and businesses were without power in Texas for many, many days, and that killed over 200 people. What we're talking about here with Germany is taking about half of their fuel offline for months, maybe years, for as long as it takes to get production online. And Biden's not promising to increase production. So, why would anyone expect Germany to basically commit to an economic suicide pact that seems to hurt them more than it hurts Russia? And I find it kind of interesting, at least unusual, that Russia's okay with an embargo and they think it's an offensive weapon, and we're okay with an embargo on them because we think it's an offensive weapon. Have you ever heard of that in warfare, where both sides think the same measure it hurts the other?
Yeah, it's just, we're really in a situation where we're doing tit for tat in that regard. And you embargo me, I'll embargo you, or I'll embargo your friends. And it's here's the big lesson here. Okay, we could go around and around in terms of this. Germany has their own problems. Germany needs to solve their problems. They're their domestic problems. They, against all the best advice, said, no, we don't have to worry about this. We're going to pursue destroying our energy industry. They have nuclear plants that they could bring up online pretty rapidly if they wanted to. They haven't torn them down. They still exist. They just aren't fueled. So they have the capacity to bring those plants up online in a month if they wanted to. They can stop, particularly they decommissioned a couple of plants just 2 months ago. So this is not, they could do a lot in terms of.
Oh, yeah. It took a long time for them to get to this point, and it's going to take them a long time to get out of it, assuming that we're not in a wider war sooner. So let's just go to the chats. And I think we gave you some more information about this issue. The embargo is on now. One of the downstream impacts of this could be splitting the economy in two. Russia already has a workaround for the financial sanctions. Why? Because years ago, China developed an alternative financial system, probably for just this situation. In the event of a world war, they would still be able to settle transactions with a country like Russia. Russia's in that financial network now, to the extent that they'll no longer be doing trade with the West. I suppose they'll be doing trade with China and Iran and North Korea, and building an alternative economic bloc. It's a new Cold War.
And guess what China needs? Oil. They need oil and natural gas. They don't have oil and natural gas. So if they could do a deal with Russia to ship the oil and natural gas and have China be basically a sole supplier, or Russia be a sole supplier for them, they would be in a position where they would have all the energy they need. And China's in a different position with Russia than, say, Germany is, because China's country is adjacent to the oil and natural gas fields in Siberia that Russia depends on. Russia doesn't have the ability to defend those fields if China decides to take them. And so China doesn't have a Germany problem, because if Russia tried to play games with them in terms of trying to cut off their energy, China would just send 1 million Chinese troops across the border and seize those fields, and there wouldn't be a darn thing Russia could do about it. if they weren't willing to use nuclear weapons against China. So
Or
that's
just cruise missiles. I think they might have something to say about that. It's certainly speculation, though, when China and Russia are so cozy right now. I think they're pretty firm allies at this point.
Everybody's an ally until they're not. And as we know, the Russians and the Germans were really strong allies in World War II until 1942, when their interests diverged, and Hitler decided, I'd really like to take that Western, the European part of Russia for my own. I want a little more. And so,
you mean the non-aggression pact that was fake?
Yeah,
and I don't think they were really good allies.
It was non-aggression.
They hated each other.
Yeah, it was non-aggression until it was aggression. And and similarly, you can sit there and say all this stuff about China and Russia being cozy. That's good until they have a dispute, and
they have to choose. China absolutely has to choose whether they want to be a part of the Western economy or this new economic bloc, and we'll see how it plays out. Let's go to the chats now. Here we got Carl Stevenson says the deep state is doing everything it can to start World War III. Ouch. Here's Anna Pezos. Who will then they be buying oil from? Venezuela? If so, it's the same as buying it from Russia, because Venezuela is owned by Russia. Well, I think that's an interesting point. It's like, if we're going to block Russian oil, why don't we just block all tin pot dictatorships who deal oil? I would just note the fact that oil producing countries, because they produce oil, tend to be very unstable. So you could do that, but you're going to say we're going to stop buying oil from Saudi Arabia. Europe desperately needs it. I think that we should probably keep good relations with Saudi Arabia.
Robert, let's talk about what Biden's talking about. We know that Pete Buttigieg, his Secretary of Transportation, over the weekend was asked, what about buying? Are you going to buy oil from Iran once the Iran deal is done? And they're about to release the Iran deal, by the way. And Iran gives Iran basically carte blanche to go nuclear. And Joe Biden's basically giving away the store to get an Iran deal done. But so they're going to try to get oil from Iran. Iran produces less oil than Texas. Just to put it into perspective, they produce less oil than Texas. But Iranian oil, they're going to be on the market. What Buttigieg said, and this is really important to remember when he's the Democratic candidate for president in 2024, Buttigieg said, well, we don't want to solve a temporary problem, meaning the
war.
The high prices of gasoline and the like. We don't want to solve a temporary problem with a permanent solution.
Well, let's stop right there. How long did the Cold War last, Rick? Do you remember?
Well, yeah, I do. It was World War II ended in 1945, and the Cold War ended in 1989. So that would be, if my math is correct, 34 years.
Would that be a short-term problem?
In God's economy, yes, but in man's economy, no. It's half a life.
Oh yeah, I think that Buttigieg, that comment will not age well when this war is still going on and prices are still really high because the Biden administration was so stubborn that they decided not to drill. Let's get through these chats. Venezuela owes so much money to Russia and will never be able to pay them back. I think that they could run some oil through Venezuela. Watch out for that, guys. Carol Daimler Mohajer, sorry if I mispronounced that. Biden is trying to force the new Green Deal by limiting Americans' oil. Time to impeach. Ouch. Impeach, says Jared Ronsaville. Here we have MCG. Where are our congressional representatives? Why can't they counter the actions of the executive branch? Well, on this particular issue, I think there's near unanimity about doing the embargo and escalation right now. I think that's the trajectory we're on.
Robert, the answer, though, there is countering the actions of the executive branch in terms of strangling domestic oil production and domestic energy production. And Congress could do that. Congress has the power to say, for instance, in coal production, if Congress merely, or any of this climate change junk, all they'd have to do is put language inside the AIR Act that specifically said that carbon dioxide is not a pollutant.
Or defund the carbon endangerment finding. None of the funds shall be used executing that. Defund the clean energy power plan from the Obama administration that put the restrictions on the coal facilities in the first place. Defund ESG. We mentioned that earlier, and then allocate monies. They have an omnibus bill. They could spend money to drill. If there's not a free market, they're saying Psaki's saying the oil companies refuse to drill on the permits they have. Well, fine. If that was really a problem, we could probably drill it. The federal government could drill it under this emergency circumstance. We're going to be a world war.
We're not going to advocate the federal government drill anything. They can't. Joe Biden trying to drill a well is so.
Well, then do the leases.
He'd think he was fighting oil when he put a hole in a pipeline, but it's a.
No, that's fair. I mean, I don't want the government involved with that, but they're getting away.
The answer to Psaki's statement is very simple. Because we talked about ESGs earlier, because of the financial constraints being put on oil and natural gas in terms of developing new wells, it's very hard to get the financing to do that. So consequently, the financing is tight. And so it's a very difficult decision to actually do that. They do have leases that they own that are productive that they could put additional wells in. You could dramatically expand Eagle Ford, for instance, in Texas, and so there's things that can be done in terms of immediately punching holes and drilling and bringing new rigs on. The fact is we haven't had a single new rig brought on in the last I think I read a year, but it could be 6 months.
Well, yeah, but the thing we really need to export, frankly, is not so much oil, but the natural gas, and so maybe that will factor into the downstream. I don't know why we're not producing more.
Yeah, the fact is, places like New York State don't allow for the Marcellus shale field that's in New York State to be taken, get the natural gas out of it. They don't allow the hydraulic fracturing. So states like New York State, their government are effectively blocking the ability to maximize those oil fields. Well, and in directly doing so, they are creating an environment where we have higher natural gas prices than we normally have, but we're not able to build to get more out the door. And quite honestly, we need to be able to build multiple new liquefied natural gas terminals, so we have the capacity, once we get the natural gas out, to convert it to liquefied natural gas and ship it on its way to Europe to offset the.
I do think if we wind up in a wider war, though, that the need to increase production immediately, it's going to come into play, and that they might come in and say, "Well, we can't afford to do it." What do we do then, Rick? If the oil companies say we need more resources?
Well, the oil companies say they need more resources. The best way to get the oil companies resources right now, with oil at $125, $140 a barrel, whatever it is settling on today, the best way to get them more resources is let them punch more holes. Okay, let them do what they do. Give them the capital. So they can do that. So they can go off and be oil companies. Don't try to, one of the lessons we have out of this, and it's really important to understand this, Venezuela has more oil than the United States does. And yet we are one of the leading producers of oil in the world. Venezuela isn't. Why is Venezuela not? Because for the last 20 years, they've had a nationalized oil industry that doesn't work. And so there's very limited amount of oil that's coming out of Venezuela. Mexico nationalized the oil companies in Mexico. Northern Mexico is South Texas. Please understand that. They both have a lot of oil. They also have the ability, a lot of hydraulic fracturing fields that are on the Texas side are utilized, and on the
do we have distribution constraints? Why aren't we offsetting Russia in natural gas in Europe?
And so the answer
is the supply chains? What's going on?
Well, first of all, in the last 5 years in Europe, we have dramatically increased the amount of natural gas we supply to Europe. In terms of LNG, we are the number one supplier of liquefied natural gas to Europe right now, and we were at zero in 2016. So that's this is an industry that's growing rapidly, or has been growing rapidly over the last 5 years. And quite honestly, many people don't say much nice about Paul Ryan very often, and I find it hard sometimes to say nice things about him in retrospect. But the fact of the matter is, one of the things they did is they did increase the ability, or make it so we could export oil and natural gas. And that decision that was made back in 2014, 2015, somewhere in there, is what opened the door for liquefied natural gas terminals dotting the East Coast now, and the ability to begin to export. So
I think that you identify
is really moving fast right now.
I think you identify a key constraint there too, though, is that they're lacking capital precisely because of ESG. So definitely getting rid of that is the long-term solution to their capital funding problems, even if you're in a short-term fix. And it's like, oh, we need more energy right now. And I don't think anyone's really presented a solution to that just yet. We got a lot of long-term solutions, like we've discussed them, but I don't know how quickly they would come up to speed, even if Biden implemented them today.
One of the interesting things, and this talks to urgency. You think that the White House would be urgent to get something done in terms of increasing oil supply on the world to lower the price of oil and not allow Russia to have that kind of capacity to dictate price and as a whole, or at least have an inordinate impact on price. So you would think that Joe Biden would be trying to fix that. Well, what he's actually trying to, I'll give you a sense.
Congressional Republicans, I think they have a few bills.
Give you a sense of urgency that he has. He has a trip planned for Europe in mid-May, 2.5 months from now. They're talking about adding on a day into going to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to meet with the Saudis about increasing oil supplies. Okay, think about this in context. If Donald Trump were president, he would have the energy secretary shuttling around the Middle East. He'd be working the phones nonstop, talking to these guys. What do we need to get this done? What's the deal? What do we have to do? And he would have deals done where, on the short term, those who have the capacity to turn on the spigots in a big way, would have those spigots turned on.
Oh yeah,
and this problem would be solved. But Joe Biden,
Trump had great relations with the Saudis.
I got to emphasize this: 2.5 months. They're trying to fit it into his schedule. A guy who basically does one event a day, and who knows what he's doing the rest of the time. If the president of the United States can't do his job, then he should stop being the president of the United States. He should resign.
Well, I think Kamala would do the same exact thing, and she has no problem.
His job right now is to lead America in this crisis and go and meet with foreign leaders to get the taps, the spigots opened elsewhere. And the fact that the Saudis have told him no yet twice tells you how diminished Joe Biden is in the office of the presidency.
Yeah. Here's Anthony Mosley, Sleepy Joe's a joke. Here's Pauline Langlis, thank you, taking advantage of a war against innocent people to force the green BS deal.
Yeah, the Green New Deal, and she just gave it an adjective there.
I'm not sure what it means, Rick. Anyway,
BS? You don't know what BS means? No, me neither. It starts with bull.
I'm kidding.
Oh, okay.
Arthur Rollo, impeach. Betsy Burns, climate hasn't changed in 30 years. So what's the problem? Our oil use is clean use. Biden needs to be impeached for this and breaching our borders. Drill, baby, drill. Vodell Alcon. I'm not sure what that means. We'll skip it. Daniel Cunningham. Thank you so much. Common sense is in short supply with the communists. And even the non-communists. Buku Dinky Dow. The main problem is that Biden wants war. Let's see. Daniel Cunningham, commies in the power in America. With K. Betsy Burns. Look at the wind energy in Texas last year. Complete breakdown in winter and lost lives from cold weather. What's the answer to that? There isn't one. You have to drill more. Texas needs to produce more thermal energy. The fact was they hadn't produced more natural gas or coal plants. They retroed a few coal and made them natural gas, but they're not building any new nuclear, no new coal. You need more thermal plants over there.
Yeah, let's poke on that, because Texas, we all think of Texas as being this free market haven, but Texas actually has set out to do something. They wanted to control their electricity market. And so they set up a system where you could only own so many natural gas plants, so much of the overall electricity supply. So one company could only own so much. Well, what that and then they incentivized the building of renewables, wind and solar. And as people know who are familiar with Texas, when you get out there in West Texas, it's really windy, and so there's a lot of wind energy generated out there. So they didn't generate any more nuclear. They didn't generate any more natural gas or coal electricity generating plants. They had all their increase was in renewables, and as a result, when the renewables failed because of the cold weather, when the windmills froze, what happened was Texans froze. And truthfully, they had some upkeep problems in terms of their coal-fired plants.
Oh yeah,
didn't keep
totally not winterized.
So there was a lot of problems there. But Robert wrote a piece on this. He did an extensive research on this last year because we really wanted to get to the bottom of how Texas.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
they built a lot of windmills and they did a lot of solar in terms of expanding. Like, what did they do to expand capacity? They did that, but no new thermal, and that I think is a tragedy. But it just goes to show you how pervasive I think ESG is. I think that is the biggest, probably the far more influential of all the policies, and the least understood, the least known, and something that frankly doesn't get enough attention. But this is why it's more profitable to do wind and solar in Texas right now than it is to make a new coal plant or a new natural gas plant. And that's a tragedy, and it should never happen again. And I urge Texas to fix this now, or Texas is going to be blue.
Let's just, in terms of wind, Warren Buffett owns a tremendous amount of wind producing windmills. He's invested heavily in it. And when asked why, he says, because the wind production tax credits, because I get paid to do that. And there's no profit in wind without the government incentive to create it. And that's ultimately that's where the ESGs are attempting to come in and make it so there's enough so there's a demand. They're trying to force investment into wind to try to create a self-fulfilling prophecy that the wind energy then can be upped in terms of how much it produces, and the cost of that energy goes up, and that makes it a profitable enterprise. But right now, wind competing against natural gas fails on a profit loss margin unless there's government incentives to have wind energy.
All right. And now wrapping this up, Anna Pezos, why raising the price of gas? We have gas. Who will he be buying from? Well, just to be clear, the U.S. doesn't buy that much oil from Russia. So this 400,000 barrels a day, it's kind of a drop in the bucket. And we'll see if it even provokes a gas embargo from Russia against Germany and the rest of Europe. Here we go. Hashtag FJB. Oof. Drill our oil. I agree. We need to drill our oil. Betsy Burns, Biden wants to buy from Iran. We don't want their oil. Well, he's probably going to buy it anyways.
Well, Robert, let's just, I know we got to get off, but here's the point, and I think it's really important. It is absurd to sit there and say, we're not going to import oil from Canada. And as oppressive as Trudeau has been over the last 2-3 months, it is absurd to not buy oil from Canada, not import oil from Canada, but then go to the mullahs who are cash strapped and say, oh, we're going to prop up your regime that has secret police pulling in students and killing people regularly for having the audacious idea that maybe they should have actual religious freedom and actual freedom of thought in that country. So when he does the deal with Iran, understand he's dealing with the absolute most egregious tyrant in the world. And that's where he prefers to do deals rather than having the Keystone XL pipeline. So whenever he talks about human rights, I want you to look at that guy and say, human rights, my ear. He supports the Ayatollahs over the people of Iran. And he wants to give, and he's giving them money as opposed to allowing the Keystone XL pipeline to be completed here in America, so we are able to have secure oil from the tar sands of Alberta. It's insane.
It absolutely is. And just to remind everyone, even Elon Musk, the biggest beneficiary of ESG, recognizes that, says we need not only more natural gas and oil, but also called for more nuclear to help offset Russia. He sees this as a long-term problem, unlike our own government right now. And just rounding out the chat here, we have Not My Real Name. When China invades and takes over the U.S., they will want all the natural resources. So they're telling Xi to buy elsewhere, so there's more for them when they do come, I guess. Bonnabelle Miller, oh, come on, people, give Uncle Joe a break. He's just trying to get his cut. Yeah, I mean, this just a little more corruption out of the Bidens. What a surprise. Dean Williamson, Joe Biden is as weak as a popcorn. Okay, skip. Betsy Burns, China will invade Taiwan next. Well, a lot of serious analysts are very worried that by taking strategic ambiguity off the table, Taiwan is in very, very dire straits. However, the U.S. Navy is in the South China Sea right now, directly challenging what the Chinese are doing. And sometimes actions speak louder than words, Rick. I think that was one of the themes from last episode. We don't have to revisit that. Watch last episode. You'll get the whole take on NATO and how Taiwan's threatened. Not My Real Name says, yes, goodbye, Taiwan. It was a beautiful country. Not My Real Name. Russia seems to be willing to use nukes. It's just another tool for them, in my opinion. What do you think of that, Rick? The Russian president is definitely talking about using nuclear weapons. He's mentioned it a few times now. He's drawn a few very well-painted red lines that are very easy to identify. The Russians are making a few demands. We could just summarize them real quick. They don't want, I think the number one was no Ukraine in NATO. So what do you think? How far does this escalate? Is nuclear war a possibility now, whereas a month ago we didn't think it was all that realistic?
I think it's more possible now than before. I don't think, what Putin's doing with his threats of nuclear war is he's reminding everybody that he has not taken first strike off the table. And the first strike has been a big argument about whether the United States should say we're not going to use nuclear weapons first. And there's a reason why you want to maintain the flexibility to have first strike. And that is if it keeps the other people honest. If one side's willing to use nuclear weapons and the other side's not willing to use nuclear weapons, there is no mutually assured destruction. There is no deterrence in that regard. And the deterrence is the willingness of both sides to use them and an unwillingness of the people in both countries to die because of it. That is the deterrence. And so when Russia's flaunting the willingness to do first strike, they are challenging Biden and challenging the nuclear powers in Europe by saying, which France and Great Britain, by saying to them, I'm going to use nuclear weapons if I want to. Are you willing to basically match me in rhetoric?
And just a subtle distinction between Russian/Soviet nuclear doctrine versus the United States. Presidents like Ronald Reagan wanted missile defense but Nixon had gotten us into a treaty on a ABM treaty that forbid it. George Bush took us out of that. And so I think that there's, when it comes to the nuclear deterrence, mutually assured destruction, that was always the Soviet doctrine. And it seems that our side was like, we wanted ways to defeat their first strike capability. So we pursued things like missile defense and Star Wars. And any parting thoughts, Rick, before we get out of here?
Yeah, the situation's serious. We're seeing the Biden administration take this action. But I think that everybody, if you really care about this, then the objective has got to be to get Congress to start taking action and to undo the things that Biden has put in place that make it so we are going rapidly to becoming where Germany is. Congress needs to start acting now. They need to reject this Green New Deal nonsense, and they need to start pushing forward policies that are going to make America drilling and American pipelines and our ability and new additional gasoline processing plants, refineries. We're going to need all of that. And we're going to need all of that pretty rapidly. California is taking their oil derricks offline. They're trying to shut them down. California is the 5th largest producer of oil of all the states in the United States. They're trying to take that down. When they take that down, you lose the Chevron oil refineries on the coast. And so you lose a bunch of refinery capacity. These things have snowball effects, and we need to rebuild those refineries. We need to rebuild build more pipeline, and we need to be able to deliver energy and convert energy to electricity. And if we're not willing to do that, we will be Germany, and it won't be very long.
All right. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government Foundation and Americans for Limited Government. I'm joined by Rick Manning, President of Americans for Limited Government. Please hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good evening.
Thank you, folks.